So welcome to the sixth assembly, sixth assembly reading group. We dedicated the month of June to the topic of civil space and collectivity. And for this specific gathering, Farideh, Sakhaeifar, and Krisztián Török will lead us through the selected readings and also examples of different art collective practices in United States, specifically West Coast and San Diego and LA, also Occupy Wall Street in New York, and Krisztián will be presenting more kind of like Romanian focused, like artistic activism within institutions and public sphere, looking at Harta Group and as well performance kind of activist movements and kind of occupying of institutional spaces, specifically dance theater in Bucharest. As just a quick introduction in terms of what HEKLER is and the Assembly. So HEKLER Assembly is a transnational space for cultural workers to share, discuss, and collectively imagine new ways of instituting based on the principles of self-organizing, community care, critical thinking, political education, distribution of resources, and healing. And as HEKLER is an artist-run collaborative platform and community, like transnational community that critically examines hospitality and conflict through a range of different programs. And my name is Nataša Prljević, I'm a co-initiator of it, and Farideh is a core member of HEKLER as well, and we work together on like range of different kind of like exhibitions and like including War Memory Protest, where Mandana was actually a part of. With her work, and a lot of people here participated in discussions, as well as Clear Hold Build and People's Tribunal, 28 exhibits, which is very much like relevant in this moment when it comes to restitution and reparation, as well as kind of militarization of police. Before we start, before Farideh and Krisztián, I had a really great pleasure to meet Krisztián in Sofia at the amazing place that is called Swimming Pool, run by Viktoria Draganova during the curatorial school on collaborative practices. And Krisztián has an amazing kind of understanding and knowledge when it comes to alternative education and arts activism within the like Southeastern Europe, Eastern Europe. So it's really great to have you guys together in conversation, sharing so much passion and knowledge about public space and how we can, how we exist in it and work within it. Before I hand it, I just want to say that today is Juneteenth. June 19th is a national holiday in the United States that marks the ending of slavery in 1865. And today, specifically in the context of the uprising against racial capitalism, is a way of kind of like transformation of and claiming of this date in a different kind of like political realm, where it actually becomes a day for like marking the celebration of Black liberation. So I think that one of our members, like Eryka, would potentially join us from the actual gathering that is happening at Katmandu Plaza, starting at 2 p.m. That started at 2 p.m. I'm gonna hand over to Farideh and Krisztián. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is so awesome to see your faces. We were thinking about doing a quick introduction and asking everybody to give us your name. It's mainly icebreaker for, I'm calling it for me, to not freak out. If you can have that, so you guys introduce yourselves and give us your name and if you like your last name. And also since we're going to talk about public space, we were thinking about having like a silly question and ask you guys, if you were an element in public space, what would you be? And I can start. So I'm Farideh, and if I was an element in public space, I wanted to be that tree, I guess, that people are pointing at and like, I'm standing there, come find me.
Hi, thanks for HEKLER for organizing it, and thanks Natasha for putting us together as co-host. It was really great to have a previous conversation with Farideh about public space, and I already learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to more conversations. And my answer to our question is that I would be a fountain, because when I was a kid, in front of a museum in my hometown where I'm at now, I would go there to swim, and I think that's just, you know, the kind of childhood memory that would make you want to be a fountain. So anybody who would like to go next can pop up, or I can just name as you feel most comfortable.
Maybe we can call names to make it
Okay,
happen.
Cool. Okay.
Cousin, do you want to go next? I'm going based on, you know, the faces that I see, so Cousin is next.
Hi, my name is Cousin. It's very interesting. I just started thinking about it. I wanted to be fire extinguisher.
Cool. Yelena, what about you?
I don't know. I would like to be a cloud, to move free into the sky and change shapes and still be a cloud at the end.
Nice. Luciana is next.
I think I would love to be a bench. Every time I'm in public space, I look at, you know, the seating options, and not necessarily with a back or anything, but just surface that people can rest their bodies.
Vandana.
Hi, this is Mandana. I don't know if I want to be something in the public space, but because I'm living in Vancouver and I'm pretty close to the ocean, I want to be water, actually. I don't know, like maybe fountain, something like you. Yeah.
Elsa.
It's a very tough question, but I think I would want to be a wall that people can put things up on. Yeah.
Jelka. You're on mute.
Could you unmute her, Natasha?
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
I think I want to be, my name is Jelka. I would love to be the third stair on the staircase. Public spaces I'm thinking about, always there is some staircase. Somewhere on the side at least. So the third is pretty good to sit.
Nice. Daniel.
I think I would like to be a memory, or part of a common memory, or maybe air, since now when I'm in the street, I just have to wear this mask all the time. I just miss breathing good air.
Pablo.
Hi, everybody. My name is Pablo Duran. In a public space, I'd like to be the sound system.
Nice. Edith.
Oh, okay. So like, I'm not sure if this counts as a public space, like object in the public space, but I would like to be that like big communist antenna for cable that are on top of the blocks, you know? They look like a spaceship and they kind of send waves. So I think that's what I wanted to be in a public space, just up, sending stuff out.
Nice.
If that helps.
Yeah. The next person is Rssx. Sorry.
Sorry, my name is Emma. And yeah, I need to change that. Sorry for that. And I think I would like to be, well, I knew when it was going to be my turn, I wouldn't have decided, but maybe a puddle, like of water. So it it's not always like present, and it means that the floor is uneven, and it also like has the power to like reflect stuff. So I kind of like it.
Eva.
Thanks.
Unmute. Hi, my name is Eva Davidova, and in public space, I would like to be the air that expands and communications occur, and it gets fresher and more dense.
Nice. Serlina. Yeah, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong.
Hi, my name is Lyra, and I would be a grassy mountain, like a earth that you can play on, or if it snows, you can sled down, or at any time you can walk up to the top and get a view of the space.
That's really nice.
Sonia. You're on mute.
Hi, my name is Sonia Bloom, and I'm also just decided at the last minute, but I think I would want to be like a community garden, like a city urban garden where people come together and like plant things and work on the ground, on the earth.
Nice. Nechama.
Hi everybody, I'm Nechama Winston. I think what I would like to be, I was debating between two things. Either it would be like a billboard, like some kind of signage, or this might sound strange, but maybe a trash can.
Bilyana.
Hi everyone, my name is Bilyana. So at first I wanted to say bench, but since that's used, let's say a key for the lock, because I'm thinking when I'm saying this of like closed public spaces such as parks and community gardens, because a lot of them closed past 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. and I feel it's important to have a space past that time, and keep it open.
Nice. Viviana.
Hi there. Well, my name is Bilyana, and I would like to be something to forage.
Yes. Eryka, can you talk, or you'd rather not to talk? Well, Eryka is in the protest, so I guess we can skip her, maybe. Flaviu.
Hi, my name is Flaviu, and I'd like to be this place that I think exists in every city or town, where the locals have like this informal name for it, which is the meeting place. For when you say you're going to meet at the bridge, and everybody knows what the bridge is, but like people from outside don't know.
That's
cool.
Rashmi.
I would be a big rock.
Nice. Isidora.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Isidora, and I would like to be a crosswalk. I don't know, I just think of it as a safe space for people who want to change their direction in a way. So like some kind of a support.
Hengameh.
Sorry, I joined a little late. I don't know the question.
Oh, the question. Sorry, go ahead, Krisztián.
The question is, what would you like to be in public space?
Oh, okay, public space.
What element?
So it can't be like farmland or something, right? Because I was thinking about the farmland, or maybe somewhere that.
I guess that could be a public space in some places.
Yeah.
Yes, well, yeah, like a park, maybe.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yannick? You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. My name is Yannick. I would, if I was a public, I'm thinking maybe a lamppost, because it's such an intimate space where I could illuminate or kind of shed some kind of light while they're kind of like discussing something or trying to find something in the dark. Yeah.
Nice. Nada.
Hi, nice to see you all. If I was something in public space, I think I'd choose a bridge over a water.
Nice.
Cross, and it's two things that I could choose in one.
Carlos. You're on mute.
Hi, I'm Carlos. And if I could do something in public space, I don't know if they have them in all countries, but sometimes you see them in parks in the US and surely in other places. Like they're chess sets, but like within the park, like within a table. Yeah, like made out of concrete. So I'd be like a public chess.
Nice. Yeah. Kiana.
Hi, my name is Kiana. I think I would like to be this old clock somewhere so high so I can have a good view of the city and making this cute sound like bing, bing. And the music, because every time I hear it, it's kind of making me happy. So
nice. Milika.
Hi. I would like to be like a pavement, something practical so that people can walk on me, go from place A to place B.
Nice. Rami.
I think I would like to be the fire that's blocking a road in a protest.
Mohammed.
Hi, my name is Mohammed. I'll be a bench.
Are you going to be the bench with the arm seats or without the arm seat?
Without the arm seat.
Cool.
Cool. That was the tricky question.
Yeah.
Natasha, what about you?
I'm going to go with a hybrid of a bench and a trash can, a complaint box.
Cool.
There's like agitprop trains, like Bolshevik trains, where you know, people had an illusion of being heard, but maybe like subverting that to actually hearing people.
I think we
have Bilyana haven't spoken yet, I think,
sure.
but I'm not sure she has video.
Yeah, she doesn't have video, but he can hear.
Okay, technical issues. Okay, she's writing in the chat. Could you tell us in? Great. Okay. Cool. Okay, super. And a small one over a piano.
Nice.
Right. That now we have a whole public space with everyone in it.
Yeah.
So we can actually talk about public spaces.
Everybody had a chance to say what they would be, right? Awesome. So just giving you some background in terms of like the readings that I selected and why I selected them. So I was basically, you know, since the pandemic has started and maybe like a little bit before that, I've been thinking about the public space and how much I belong to the public space and learning more about the idea of specifically public space in the United States and, you know, going to the suburbs, how it's completely different and the functionality of public space is changing depending on if you're living in a metropolitan or if you're living in a smaller town. And also living in New York City, eventually learning that majority of public spaces are privately owned. And also the amount of surveillance and the presence of authority around the city always made me think about, you know, how much do I enjoy being in the public space and how much can I be myself when I'm hanging out in the public space. And also like redefining public space and how much as an artist I have access to the public space and how much can I have a presence in the public space. And the other reason that I thought about, you know, going back in history and looking at the art collectives that kind of like focus on accessibility and the usage of public spaces, because in my opinion, and I think we talked about it over the weeks, I see a failure in institutions and in the art world that really encourages me to step away from that platform and think about alternative spaces. And the reason that I think there's a failure in institutions is because of the lack of inclusivity of and lack of representation of artists of color, Black and Indigenous people, and also the systematic censorship that exists within our art world system. And we can all talk about it more, but that's how I feel about the art world right now. And then like being part of Occupy Wall Street, experiencing it firsthand, and the past 10 years, the past 8-9 years, how I've been seeing the city and how I've been reflecting on what happened during the Occupy Wall Street and the artworks that I've been seeing in the galleries, museums, and also publicly. So the readings that I selected are, one is ASCO, No Movies, The Art of False Documentation, No Border Town, and then the reading about Occupy Wall Street and the Constitution around public space. I'm gonna share my screen just because I think it makes it more fun to look at the artwork that these artists made, and I'm just gonna point at some of the elements that I found, also like mentioning that this is, I'm thinking at it as a research project that I've been working on in the studio, and it's just a work in progress, you know, understanding public space and understanding me as an artist. So, you know, I thought that this could be a good opportunity for everybody to, you know, share your experience, considering the fact that, you know, we're all coming from different backgrounds and different experiences and want to be different elements in public space. Yeah, I'm curious to see what you think about public space, how you see yourself in public space, and as artists, activists, cultural workers, scholars, where and how can we imagine a new definition of these public spaces. So, sorry, wrong place. So in the reading No Movies, The Art of False Documentation, I guess what I'm really interested in studying and looking at their practice is how ASCO, as an art collective that you know, was based in East Los Angeles, first of all, claiming the language and redefining the language by choosing the name ASCO, which means disgust, and how they are giving it meaning and using it in a different way. That was, you know, one of the interesting things that I really enjoyed learning about, and also like the way that they're using media and the way that they're using public space in order to reclaim their identity and their presence in the city. So, you know, challenging the stereotype by a piece like Decoy, gang war victim, closing the streets, imitating the language of media and false news around the stereotyping of Chicana community, and bringing awareness around that subject. Or tagging LACMA by illegally tagging LACMA and making the museum as a canvas for themselves to, again, reclaiming institutions and bringing awareness on the absence of the representation of Chicana community in the museums and in the institutions. In the expense of the erasure of the graffiti that was created by the Chicana community around the city. So after LACMA erased the tag on the museum wall, they decided to completely erase and remove graffitis around the city, which was one of the prominent presence of Chicano community in the city. And then no movie, going back to photography and again repurposing photography for the purpose of going, kind of like tackling on the idea of absence and lack of presentation, and how can I use that absence and lack of representation to bring awareness on that absence by creating these images that are based on, the movies that was never made. That was also, again, going back to the idea of what is the language of making art and how you can kind of like use the things that you have around you to repurpose them and redefine them and also bring awareness on those topics. And I guess like among all of their works, I guess like their murals are really my favorite because of the way that they are, redefining mural, these temporary murals, putting their bodies in front of the wall or in front of these landscapes, taking quick photographs, publishing the photographs in a larger amount, and creating these murals. That is also a reference to historical representation of Chicano community by having murals around the city. Because there has been always the absence of their monuments, the absence of their history in the city. That was a way to kind of reclaiming that identity and the presence in the city. And another interesting thing that they talk about is the body as something that is disgusted by the people in that city. And by bringing their body into the mural, they are kind of forcing the audience to look at the body that they're disgusted with. And I found that really powerful in terms of like, again, reclaiming their identity and their presence as very influential part of the economic system and also the cultural system and all different aspects that actually make a city. This is another example of the mural that they posed in front of the wall and took a quick picture and then they left. That's been pretty much their practice, staging something and taking photographs of that, deconstructing that kind of like installation or that performance that was happening in the public space, and then distributing the photographs as a way of kind of like showing what they did and presenting themselves. And then going to the Invisible Town Square, the collective, the artist collaborators in San Diego, looking at their work and learning about their work, I guess like I'm at the point of comparison, going back and forth between what they did and thinking about, is it still possible? And can we still do that? Because their project really makes me think about, again, I'm thinking about the financial aspect of creating artworks and affordability of creating that, putting myself in 2020 and thinking about if I wanted to, have a space in the bus, in the subway, on billboards, would I be able to afford it? Or would I be able to receive a grant in order to do that? And as we learn, from this collective is that many times that they used NEA grants, they've been limited and they've been questioned on how and why they're using that money in this way. And that brought a lot of limitation and controversy around, the funding of these projects. And that's a question that, again, I ask myself constantly, that if I'm functioning in this system and if I'm creating in this system, I have a set of moralities that stops me from accepting grants and money from any institution. And any like I'm not okay by being funded by corporates to make anti-war artwork, because I see a big that's controversial for me. So it put me in a situation that I can't financially sustain myself as an artist, and therefore I can't be as present as I want in the art scene. And I think that's the problem that most of the artists are dealing with, the finance and the way to be able to fund our projects. but at the same time, you know, looking at how they are repurposing, you know, these public spaces, using the billboards, using the advertisement slots, or creating a public sculpture that goes to the censorship to the point that the city decides to erase and take out the whole piece out of this festival that everybody had a piece. And yeah, this brings me back to, you know, again, looking at the present time and saying that, yes, we have that systematic censorship for this reason and for many other reasons, and examples of the representation of art, like radical art, that's been erased and never was part of the larger discourse, or was never given enough platform to become part of a larger discourse. And then moving forward, I wasn't able to, unfortunately, read this article, but I also came up in this this article in Art Forum that mentioned in 2011, they republished this photograph by ASCO as a way to kind of find the reference between the way that they used art and they used public space in relation to what happened in Occupy Wall Street. And as a more contemporary example, I'm thinking about Occupy Wall Street, and I'm thinking about, you know, my agency and my right to the public space as an individual, as a collective, and as a movement. And that also brings me back to what is happening right now around the city and the amount of control, surveillance, and the presence of authorities on the street, to the point that we have curfew, which for me it was a big deal. For me it created a lot of questions about, again, my presence and the presence of our bodies as the public and as the general in the public space, and how much are we regulated. Yeah, I guess I'm done. Just one more thing, going back, you know, continuing with Occupy Wall Street, I think another thing that I wanted to put out, I think something that is stayed from, not just one thing, but one of the things that has stayed from Occupy Wall Street is a collective called Decolonize Displaced. And that's like one of the few examples of radical art collectives that I see continuing what happened in Occupy Wall Street in a different form. And they are still able to practice, which we can all talk about, you know, their approaches and their work if you're interested in. So I'm gonna just stop my screen and pass it to Krisztián.
Thanks very much. And let me just, okay, where is this now? It was meant to be here. Sorry. I lost my screen I wanted to share. Here. Okay, cool. So
Elsa, sorry, Krisztián, Elsa is asking what happened with ASCO, Farideh.
So ASCO was a collective that was active from the 70s to early 80s. And after that, so it was a collective that it had some core members and then some other artists would join them for different projects. And after like early 80s, they stopped working as a collective. They've been working as an individual, but not as a collective. Yeah, so you can see like their practices as an individual, but as a collective, I don't think that they made, you know, any more pieces.
Can I ask a question about them? Well, have they been kind of incorporated in that bigger kind of, I don't know, like, have they been institutionalized, or they're like kind of like?
So as a collective, the reason that they started was during the Civil War movement and Chicano movement in the West Coast, and that was kind of their need to kind of flourish and come into presence. That was like, the collective was also a way to criticize the institutions and bring awareness on the absence of the representation of Chicano artists in the institutions. In the early 80s, if I'm not wrong, LACMA, after like all these controversial pieces, LACMA curated the show, and they presented all the artworks that they made. And ironically, they started by, like, when you enter the space, the first piece that you see is the tagging of LACMA piece, a photograph of that, and then the rest of, you know, photographs of the pieces that they made.
So I have another question. I'm sorry if I'm not allowed to ask questions, just to stop me. Do you think that they are radical? They're still radical or not anymore?
You mean because they're institutionalized? Yeah. I would doubt that. I'm, you know, if I would like to think of it as, you know, they had a mission and they had a purpose and they achieved that. If, you know, I'm not saying that museums are inclusive right now and they reached the goal, but if they got to the point that they were heard and they were represented, I'm considering it a radical move. And I'm referring to them as a reference to understand, you know, different ways of being radical. But if they are still radical and if they're still making radical artwork, unfortunately, I don't have them. I don't know exactly what's happening, but for that time and for what they did, I still think that that's pretty radical.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
I'm going to take the geographical location a little bit further away. Let me see if I can do this. Okay, so I'm going to talk about actually a group and a self-organized institution, Harta Project, which is a female group from Timișoara, from Romania, which started out in 2001. And the CNDB, or the National Dance Center, from Bucharest, and especially from the event when they were evicted from the National Theatre, where they gained a space when the institution was self-organized in 2004. Before kind of further going into it, I shared with you 3 texts to the reads. One of them was a reflection from Harta about its projects from 2006 that they did for a biennale in Iași, which is one of the most northern eastern city of Romania. If I remember right, it's the 2nd biggest city, where there was a biennial going on until 2009. But please, my friends who are from Romania, correct me if I'm wrong. And later actually transformed into the member of a transit network, which has an institution there now. But Harta's project was reflecting there on social process of learning. They actually constituted a new school book, and the text I shared is a reflection, their own reflection on the school book. And the other 2 texts I shared are text about recollections about the CNDB Occupy in 2011. Actually, for me, both of these self-organized institutions and collective groups were not part of my core research in the last 1.5 years, which I did on alternative education in Eastern Europe. I was researching other elements, but meanwhile researching them, I saw a lot of elements that, even though the people who I talked with didn't necessarily mention directly these events as influence, I think they were very important. And I'm with no means I would like to only talk about Romania. I'm more thinking here about Eastern Europe. And the other reason I think Harta's text is extremely useful, because although I'm not going to go through all the examples they talk about, I think it gives a really good moment of how to translate your locality to another audience. Because a few of you have been here together, and I always been talking about kind of translation, how we can understand actions from different localities. And I think this kind of way of personal examples that Harta did in the text is a very useful way. So Harta Periferica's action was basically they created a number of public posters, as it can be seen on this photograph, in different topics. And each poster would reflect one of the 7 topics that you can see on the right side of the screen. which were kind of discussed in the text. I selected 3 of these posters. Okay, yeah. Which you can see. So the first one is contemplation the only attitude that one should have towards a work of art? How do the dominant ideologies reflect in the way art institutions are organized? And how does art change our viewing angle by making us question ourselves and the others? All the pictures were kind of taken in Yash, in different places. One of them in the public space, as you can see next to the monument. Other one is in the museum, and one of them in the classroom of kids that they work together during Peripheric. Basically, the text I gave you is reflecting on the certain issues that I have shared with you, and I didn't count it that I cannot see my notes with the shared scene, so I'm really sorry. I have to, can you still see the presentation properly? No. Okay, this is a little bit, I'm sorry. I have to get used to the technical side of these Zoom presentations because I'm usually able to see my notes. Is it visible like this? Or is it very confusing? Okay, great, thanks for the feedback. Sorry, I lost the train of thought. Okay. And in the text, I'm very sorry. That's great.
You were talking about the 3 examples that you picked from the...
Yes, and then I wanted to talk about the questions, but I cannot find the notes, of course. Which anyways, I can find them here.
Maybe it's in the slide with the 3 posters.
Yeah, no. I found I copied them out, but then they are not where they should be, obviously. So whatever.
That's okay. We can wait that you find them.
Thanks very much. I'm really sorry. Okay, so yeah, found them. So I'm mostly focused on the section about dialogue and sociability, which is basically, actually, the example they bring there, it reflects all the 3 of them. So they talk about a care center, a place called Care Center, which runs in Bucharest by a teacher called Roxana Marin. It was running in 2007, and I was checking now, and they don't run anymore. But they kind of talk about the fact that how can you use the words such as dialogue and communication and personal involvement to keep them unrelated in the meaning of power without risking the impression of empty rhetoric, which I'm kind of interested in the fact that how can these notions can be actually implemented in real life. During my research, I've been relying a lot on Pascal Guillen's text that was actually recommended to me by Viviana, who's present here. And the reason I called the presentation Public Space Without Civil Action, because Guillen talks about the fact that public space is actually an already constituted thing. I always question the fact that in Eastern Europe, public space exists anyways, but if I think about if it exists, then we have to talk about what actions you can talk about civil actions. He talks about that civic mainly refers to the government, which has civic mainly refers to the government, which has civic tasks, while civil action simply concerns non-regulated domains, which are not yet controlled by the law. Civil action is always a risky undertaking, which one sticks one neck out and risks one's own social position. This will be later important when we talk about the Occupy part, but also actually in the next project that Harta did, Public Art Bucharest in 2007, they created 2 public spaces. Sorry, because I'm not using the slides, I'm just gonna do this so you see the images. they basically created a public space in Bucharest in 2007. A project space in Bucharest in 2007, where for 1 month they invited people to sort of co-curate the space and address 4 different modules, which is post-communism, feminism, education, and display. All of the modules that they were actually considering in the reading. And they kind of reflected on 2 events that happened in the public space in Romania, and they talk about how people in Romania actually don't care much about the public space unless it radically changes. Where they actually say there are opposing attitudes toward the public space in Romania. On the one hand, there is almost complete indifference to the public space. But on the other hand, a very sensitive country, Romania is a very sensitive country when it comes to whom is populating its public space. When an LGBT rights are concerned, the Christian moral of the country immediately brought into discussion, and the public space stops to be an indifferent topic. So normally the public space is this was taken in 2007, is full of billboards, but here on the image you can see this sort of interaction which was said, death to gays, and then somebody crossed off the word death and said right to gays, and then somebody crossed off that later as well, and then the owner of the building started to clean it off. So we can see that although it's a moment where in a way the public space gets activated with civil action through kind of a really small thing. The other parts of the task, the project space, was that Harta eventually got surveilled by the secret police in Romania after the project, because in 2008 there was a NATO meeting in Bucharest, and basically the whole government in a way silenced any kind of civil action, even the smallest one, and that's why the group was followed by secret police and their kind of phones were tapped. It's kind of weird because it was really just a group who gathered different civil groups in one space. So this kind of idea of civil action and the way it can kind of feed into the public space, but it's also should be present in education in a way, takes me to my next example, which is the National Dance Center in Bucharest. As I mentioned, it was formulated in 2004 by 3 artists, 3 dancers, and at the time there was no public institutions that was supporting dance in the country, and basically they occupied a space. I don't know if you can see my cursor in the upper floor of the National Theatre that you can see on here on the left. And in 2011, I mean, like after a series of public debates about certain political standings of the dance groups and quite controversial but extremely successful internationally dances, they were evacuated from this place because the building was earthquake endangered. There are many earthquakes in Bucharest, not super big, but none of the buildings are kind of built to be earthquake safe. So they said, well, you have to leave the place. And as a reaction to that, the dancers who kind of used the space decided to occupy the space in from March the 11th. And this was the public announcement they made that you can actually find on this extremely useful Facebook group, that you can find all the images that I have used, because there is not much scholarship written about them. So as it reads here, today, the 21st of March 2011, a group of artists occupied the National Center of Bucharest. The works to destroy the center have finally started. This is what I have mentioned before. But I think the most important part is that they invite everyone. So we call for artists, students, teachers, activists, sympathizers, friends, and whoever is interested to join us. We invite you to come and use the space. They kind of define the space, and the main thing is they say is that this is not a private struggle of a community to keep their space. It is a struggle to avoid art to be considered as a recreation, as a disposable extra, instead of a sustained continuous work from the occupants. The public action started with a public performance of one of the, actually the managing director of the institution, who now works under the name Fariud. And before that, he used the name Mihai Mileța. He changed the name because he felt that the role of the leader of a public institution has taken on too much that the artist could use it. And I show you a small snippet from the action and his own reflection a little bit later. Hope it will start. I have to.
Corespondentul Al Jazeera la București vă spune că cultura oficială se instalează definitiv, au început lucrările, ne bombardează, ne asaltează. Cultura oficială, domnul Carametru, dă peste noi, vă rugăm Al Jazeera, luați legătura cu toată lumea, vă rog, transmiteți pe Euronews, pe CNN, peste tot.
Am ajuns la o situație aproape conflictuală cumva cu cei care au deschis șantierul aici, pentru că spațiul ăsta a fost, nici n-a fost preluat de la noi, practic, cu acte, în regulă. Și la un moment dat, instalarea șantierului a început. Noi veneam la serviciu, pentru că existam aici absolut legal, având o hotărâre de guvern, care există și la ora actuală și care nu a fost abrogată. Și a început să nu să ni se interzică accesul, dar să fie din ce în ce mai greu să vii la serviciu.
Sorry, that's my bad. I'm really sorry.
Independenți vă spune că cultura oficială se instalează definitiv, au început lucrările, ne bombardează, ne asaltează. Cultura oficială, domnul Carametru, dă peste noi, vă rugăm Al Jazeera, luați legătura cu toată lumea, vă rog, transmiteți pe Euronews, pe CNN, peste tot.
Am ajuns la o situație aproape conflictuală cumva cu cei care au deschis șantierul aici, pentru că spațiul ăsta a fost, nici n-a fost preluat de la noi, practic, cu acte, în regulă. Și la un moment dat, instalarea șantierului a început. Noi veneam la serviciu, pentru că existam aici absolut legal, având o hotărâre de guvern, care există și la ora actuală și care nu a fost abrogată. Și a început să nu să ni se interzică accesul, dar să fie din ce în ce mai greu să vii la serviciu. Pentru că au fost artiști care veneau la noi, încă mai aveau lucruri de luat, costume, obiecte scenografice recuzite și așa mai departe, și nu mai puteau intra aici.
Se plănuiește eradicarea culturii independente, nu vor decât cultură oficială, vă rog să transmiteți pe toată planeta, uitați o puteți la șantierul, vă rog, chemați CNN-ul, liniște, că transmitem pe Al Jazeera, liniște! Help! Al Jazeera, vă rog, veniți, salvați-ne! Erste Bank, vă rog frumos! Vreau să mă refugiez, vreau o cameră, acolo la Intercontinental, la Revoluție, breaking news! Cultura oficială, după cum vedeți, aici, între Bardi, este mare agitație, început lucrările de șantier, cultura oficială se instalează definitiv. În spatele meu este liniște mormântală, domnul Carametru stă în lotus și gândește la marea viziune pentru consacrarea bastionului definitiv al culturii naționale. Trăiască Teatrul Național! Trăiască Teatrul Național! Trăiască Teatrul Național! Trăiască Teatrul Național!
Ce puteam face era să discut cu cei de la Teatrul Național, beneficiarul acestei lucrări. Numai că beneficiarul acestei lucrări, cu cinismul de rigoare, îmi spunea nu mai discutați cu noi, noi am predat frontul de lucru către echipa care se ocupă de lucrare, discutați cu ei. Și practic mă pasau de la unul la celălalt, iar noi eram undeva la mijloc și evident că lucrurile distorsionau, comunicarea dintre noi era total aberantă, nu mai era o comunicare firească.
Atât ne-a mai rămas un mare semn de întrebare. Știu că sunt pleonastic, ceea ce spun nu face altceva decât să ilustreze ceea ce se vede. Am rămas numit în insulă. Este tot ce mai avem, stimați telespectatori. Uitați, avem aici și un reprezentant al dansatorilor și coreografilor. El este, transmitem în direct pentru Al Jazeera. Și după cum vedeți, au început lucrările, am fost asaltați, am fost agresați. Ni se ia și ultimul petic. Unde o să dansați de astăzi încolo? Ce o să faceți? Unde vă duceți? La discotecă? Dar la discotecă vă duceți în fiecare sâmbătă, oricum.
Da, așa este. Nu mai avem unde să dansăm.
Nu mai aveți unde să dansați? Și ce o să faceți în condițiile astea? Vă rog să spuneți. Aici se aude toată planeta.
Eu?
Vreau.
O să dansăm la discotecă.
Bine, vă mulțumim.
I just want you to remember the indifference of the surrounding public to the action. I think that's a really important element. So the other things occupied it. So they occupied this space where their studios been and where rehearsal hall been, if you can see. Sorry, this is kind of just playing around so you see the images properly. With different dances and this kind of laying down element. I would like you to remember to this naked body here and this kind of notion of laying down, because it will be used later on. And just to note again on the indifference of the workers to the whole action, I can just zoom on this and you can see kind of their face when one of the artists is kind of just dismantling the space and they kind of standing there ununderstandingly, or when they're taking away their props. Actually, there's a photo series with this kind of horse donkey figure and how they make pictures with them, which I kind of think is very important, how the workers reacted. There were a series of discussions throughout the 1 month of the Occupy moments, which I have another video snippet again, but before that I would like to show you another public action. The discussions were kind of formulated around what is actual goal of the protest, and as you could read it in the text, one of the members was saying that a lot of people had a lot of different ideas how to go forward, and I think the video I will show you will really formulate it well. Another thing that happened was from the artist Alexander Kirici, who you might know from certain performances. She's very sought after at the moment, and she did a public action. She was actually part of, and she's still in connection with CNDB, which still runs actually, which was called Carviale. Carviale is a Romanian composer and then ballet composer, and a huge monument was erected in front of the National Theatre for his work, which you can kind of see here. It's a huge bronze monument, which costed, well, it was really expensive. And as a reaction to that, as you can see it in the text, which Alexander says, as an example, the cost of the statuary group would have easily covered the construction budget of a new space for contemporary dance, or would have allowed the acquisition of one or more spaces, but a dynamic space where information circulates, a place for research and debate, a living place where artists can meet and works falls to become a necessity or peer of any list of priorities such as monumental art and stiffness in art, in appreciation, reminiscence of the times before 89, of the big thing, whatever it may be. I want to be specific, the action is not targeting the statuary, and she also thinks that the artist himself, whose the statuary is commemorated to, would be angry himself if he would see money spent this way. So the dancers recreated the monument itself in a lot cheaper and more temporary manner. If you're familiar with Alexander's work, this will be a recurring element using public statuary. Here I would like to go back to the notion of action, of actually creating actions and learning through actions, because this is another way Pascal Guillen talks about how actually democracy can be formulated and how civil actions can be formulated. He talks about referring to Gert Biest, the Dutch educational theorist.
If educational institutions itself is not organized in a democratic way, students will have difficulty internalizing and realizing democracy. Only if we are raised democratically and are encouraged to act democratically, from day one, we'll be also be able to bring the rules of democracy into practice. The most significant form of civic learning are likely to take place to the process of practice that makes up everyday life of children, young people and adults, the why conditions that shape the process and practice deserve our fullest attention. So here, I really think that some of these actions that happen to Occupy is actually kind of way of the group trying to establish democracy itself. And this is gonna be very visible in the video, okay. Technology is not my friend today. Oh God, I'm sorry. Okay, let's just delete this photo.
Aici. Și care, și după aia, într-un fel sau altul, se pare că toată lumea are tot felul de motive pentru chestia. Trebuie să strângem toate motivele, să găsim unul singur și o voce comună. Eu n-am nicio întrebare. Dar care este strategia? Ocupați acest spațiu, ideea că luând atitudine și făcându-se pași pe treaba asta, se va găsi o soluție, gen CNDP-ul va veni până la un spațiu, sau care este finalitatea?
Finalitatea ar fi, în afară de CNDP, care să primească un spațiu.
De ce îl face? Că nu e vizibil, el nu e vizibil.
El va deveni vizibil. Dacă mâine, de exemplu, o să fie o acțiune a celor care au protestat. Ideea e 2 secunde. Ideea e că, de exemplu, săptămâna asta când s-a stat aici, oamenii au început să se coaguleze. De exemplu, dacă protestul ăsta era vizibil de la început, poate nu reușeam să strângem atât de multe forțe, de exemplu, știi? De exemplu.
Care sunt fictive, domnule.
Care sunt fictive, bineînțeles.
Nu era o chestiune asta de protest sau o chestiune asta de negativă să mă agăț un pic de centru în ultimul moment sau nu știu ce. Era chestia asta pozitivă, știi că se creează o altfel de dinamică, o altfel de interacțiune. Înțelegi? Pentru mine asta mă motiva. Dacă asta dispare și doar să protestez pentru centru sau nu știu ce, pentru mine asta nu e suficient.
Dar nu spuneți pentru ce.
N-am că spune nimic. Băi,
n-am vorbit cu ceva și pe care e important.
Deci, cea mai mare păreare și cea mai mare treabă asta cu centrul de artă, cu chestia asta de dans, centrul de dans contemporan, ca prioritate numărul 1 și faptul că una dintre prioritățile voastre e asta cu interdisciplinarul și că poate să lucreze oameni din mai multe domenii, atunci puteți să nu mai faceți nimic, să vă opriți în momentul ăsta, sincer.
De ce?
De ce?
Pentru
că spațiul ăsta există ca identitate și ce s-a întâmplat în ultimii 6 ani aici, exact pe acest concept de Centrul Național al Dansului.
De câteva zile, de când am început noi chestia asta, s-a creat o altfel de dinamică, au venit altfel de grupuri.
De ce?
S-a creat un alt ciclu. Și nu e vorba de arte contemporană, tocmai, că e chiar și mai
exact. Dar nu văd nicio problemă și niciun obstacol în ei a fi partenerii voștri și a vă susține pentru chestia asta. Dar în același timp să renunți la ceea ce te definește.
Pentru că suntem cumva identitate în chestia asta. Și crezi în centru de arte contemporană care devine un
Dar nu e arte contemporană. Cine a vorbit de arte contemporană? Dar n-am nici sisteme de arte contemporană.
Un spațiu dinamic, un spațiu comun.
Era vorba exact de ce se întâmplă acum. Să există un spațiu în care dacă poți să adune niște oameni, nu știu, să discute ceva, să se întâlnească, să lucreze, să nu trebuiască neapărat să se întâlnească în baruri sau ceva când au ceva de lucru. Asta era ideea.
So you can kind of also see the difference between the previous clip, which actually happened in public space, and the clip that was kind of conducted in this, well, what I would call a counter-public space, in this occupied space where they're kind of trying to negotiate their own purpose and own meaning, and kind of the arguments that are raised. I really like the questions they bring up because I think it's a reoccurring question between different art practices that, you know, there was the argument that we should open up the space and be a center for contemporary art and be even more open. And then there was the counter argument of losing a certain identity and how that identity pushes forward different ideas and how we should keep existing. The one actual meeting with sort of public officials that happened on April 9th was a protest in front of the Ministry of Culture, which basically was a set of kind of dance practices, but more like, well, dance practices because these actions appeared in the dance center work, where they would kind of do a sort of a warm-up in front of the Ministry of Culture with CNDB ? Banner, and then after they would do this kind of lay down body in the public space, which I showed you before in the dance as well, which kind of many of the artists, well, it was started to use by Farideh in 2005 or 6 in different performances, and it's about the inability of the individual to kind of work against the system. And well, this kind of inability is very well shown in the next picture, where the kind of security guards of the Ministry of Culture would just kind of pull up the banner, and the question in one of the videos that I saw said as, oh, because the pavement is not a public space. So I would kind of wrap up with the thought that, although I might have presented, I don't know, I was sure about that, if I've been clear, I got a little bit confused as you saw before, that I think CNDB is not necessarily kind of a case study here. I just wanted to show you different ways these artists kind of worked with public space. They constituted a public space for themselves, or through actually civil actions that I have talked about previously. As a side note, both to Harta and CNDB, Harta still exists and works, and they in Timișoara, and CNDB currently resides in a much smaller premise, and they promised to have a bigger premise in 2021, but they, of course, as all institutions in Eastern Europe, are struggling with financial difficulties and so on. So that's kind of the end of it. That's just the definition I gave for the end, and sorry for the minor disruption, and thank you for your attention. That was a little bit long.
Thank you, it was great.
So yeah, if you have any questions, please go on. I'm also happy to share back the screen, show some pictures again.
I have a question and I guess a discussion based on what Farideh and also you, Krisztián, said. I noticed, for example, that playgrounds in Central Park, in different locations, if you compare to Prospect Park, it's not as standard. If it's Prospect Park West, it's better playground. If it's East, it's, you know, less of a budget. And Farideh was mentioning how metropolitan and also suburbia also has different spaces. And you, Krisztián, were mentioning how the money also in the cost is involved in the way people perceive. So I wonder how you think the usage of space happens based on this different perceptions.
The usage of public space?
Yes, how the user feels in, for example, if you go to a different area like metropolitan or suburbia area, how the same type of space is used, let's say a playground or benches with chairs, and you know how, because for me there is a strong component of the awareness of how much things cost, and not only function and use, you know, design basically. So instead of the perception being the body with the volumes and function and form, there is a big chunk of price of how much was invested, how much this cost, how much in the interaction with this element.
So what you're asking is that people are not willing to use certain things in a certain way because they're afraid to damage it, and there's a lack of interaction with certain elements of public space. Do I get that right?
No, that's a good point. I didn't think about being afraid of use or damage. I thought more of, this is expensive, I'll treat it well. Or this is cheap, it doesn't matter, it's disposable, it's gonna break anyways. So, but I don't know other visions based on not the design, or in the case of art pieces, the way people connect with a monument, if it's big and expensive and it's said so, and if it's not, it can be big and cheap too, but you know how the value plays in people's minds in public spaces.
One
I don't know if it makes sense to you, but it gets my attention. So you both mentioned somehow the value.
Well, something that I can think about in terms of public space, it depends on the social class and the demography of the neighborhood. Talking about Prospect Park, I think there's a big difference between east and west, and there's a big difference between north and south side of the park. With the southern side of the park, that is majority Haitian Black community, Haitian Jamaican Black community, it's less clean, there are less resources, and the space is less taken care of. And in comparison, as much as you walk to the north of the park, it's much cleaner and tighter and nicer because it belongs to a majority white, richer community. So that makes a big difference. And also, but in general, I think the way that I'm thinking about the interaction between public and public space, one aspect of it, how much of it represents me and my community, the accessibility of that, and the inviting aspect of, you know, how inviting that space is in relation to, you know, if I have children or I don't have children, if I'm a single person or not, if I have a job or not, if my community has homeless people or not. How they're like, I think everything is defined by the politics of the politics of the neighborhood and the background of the neighborhood, and also like expanding that again with my limited knowledge of America, because you know I'm immigrant, but like it's my observation looking at the suburbs. Such a thing as public space doesn't exist. It exists in the malls. You know, people don't, it's the commons in the center of the city, like downtown, that you can go and hang out, which is usually pretty small. And other than that, the only place that you can actually hang out is the malls. That somehow in the text about Occupy Wall Street, it's talking about how, you know, public space, like malls have been defined as public space because that's how it's functioning, instead of like streets and pavements and streets, you know. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think, I don't know, it's something that we can study based on the neighborhood, based on the city, and based on the population of the city, and what does it mean. You know, for example, looking at my neighborhood, I'm living in East Flatbush. We don't have community garden. During the pandemic, they didn't close any of the streets, so we use it as a public space to hang out. Whereas as I'm going to, you know, richer neighborhoods, I see that intentionally they close some of the streets so people can actually use that as the public space, and they, you know, have some open space. We don't have such a thing. And when people hang out on the street, cops show up immediately and they ask them to leave. That's a difference between how public space works in my community versus how it works few blocks, you know, north. The same with parks, the same with, you know, going to Manhattan versus being in Brooklyn. how cleaner is Manhattan compared to how clean is Brooklyn, and how much do they care about that. Of course, that place is richer, like Manhattan is for richer communities, so there's a whole different services that are given to that community in comparison to what I'm experiencing here in Brooklyn, that I can't even walk in my own block because trash is coming up to my knees. So, you know, what defines public space, from my understanding, is social class and money. Mandana wants to say something.
Okay, so I can't like stop my mind because I've been thinking a lot. What does it mean to think about like public space right now, like in this moment, right? Well, like having access to the internet, I guess, like, you know, that's like, this is social space. This is public space right now. And I don't think that like what we think about like public space for now, like after, like, thank you, Krisztián. I was thinking about like, you know, like you showed those images and I've been like thinking about like Harun Farooqi's film, right? Like the one that like kind of protesters like overtaking TV studio in Bucharest, right? And like then Hito Steyr thinking about like what kind of thinking alongside with Farooqi thinks about how the public space been removed from its physicality to this virtual space, right? And I think like we're living it, right? Like I don't know if we can think about public space in the old-fashioned way anymore. What do you think? Like for me, it's access to internet, like it's or not. I don't know, like being, and also like the thinking about like surveillance, like it's fucking scary for me to think that like all of my kind of conversations is somewhere in the air being kind of recorded, right? So it's like, it's very different. Like you can't disguise anymore. I don't know. I just like, I wanted to share this and I wanted to know, what do you think, like both of you or like anyone else?
Also, Elsa, just to jump in, Elsa is leaving comments. So Elsa, do you want to comment?
I just want to share that, especially on the internet side, for me, what signifies as public is more of what's accessible to all who are around that space. And if we're thinking of the internet, there's so many folks around the world who don't have access to it. So can it be actually a public space? Can it be characterized as a public space if a big chunk of folks still don't have access to it? So I think it's safer to think of physical space for now, given that sometimes it's more accessible, disregarding folks with disabilities too, you know? So it's just like, it's very tricky about when we think about public space and where your eyes can meet, you know?
I think we cannot think about it, you know, like we have to think of internet as public space, I guess. I don't know, but this is my kind of take on it. But
could I pass the topic for a second?
Yeah.
Yeah. These are really like, it's so complicated to discuss public space because it's a very hard thing to define. And someone had earlier even mentioned the mall, possibly conceivably as like a public space. That being said, I mean, if we're like thinking of using this definition that it must be accessible to all within the vicinity, a mall is certainly not that thing. And it's certainly defined by like a particular kind of consumerist attitude towards the public space in which you're sort of like, you know, generating revenue for the stores that you're sort of hanging around in. So, I mean, I don't know, I think it's really tricky and sometimes problematic to sort of equate all spaces that like people can walk in or can zoom into or whatever as sort of a flat playground. I know obviously that's not what's being done here, but it's something that I grapple with in my head. I mean, there are meaningful ways in which, well, the context I know best in India, that like poorer populations are using malls as space to get free AC and to hang out, but they have to wear their Sunday best to even enter the mall and pass security. So and as far as the interwebs is concerned, I mean, I got to admit, as someone who is deeply, deeply against having every aspect of my life being commodified, I'm not on Instagram. I'm not really on social media in any meaningful way. So seeing that as the public comments, I think is also, it can be quite problematic.
So Lyra has a question, if I pronounced that well. What about the role? Whether you want to jump in and ask a question?
Sure.
After you, Mohammed.
Just a comment. I think a lot about the internet in relation to public and private space. And I agree with you, Elsa, that it's not accessible and that complicates the definition. But that made me think about how many institutions are sort of assuming that the internet is accessible to all, assuming that it is this public space, or assuming that their students can have access, when many students are not able because they don't have the machines or the Wi-Fi. And then there are a lot of citizens or, people also who just sort of assume that everyone we see on Instagram is everyone in the world, and that's also absolutely not true. Just a thought.
Thank you. Mohammed.
Hi, first of all, thank you very much. I think this is a very good and timely topic, especially now. There are 2 points here, which, we talked about a lot about like this reactionary movements, and also talking about the art within context as a radical art, which kind of usually forgets to determine where does this baseline for the public art or public space comes from, which is coming from the authority that we give to local government, or the authority that is imposed by capitalist system to people to determine what is public, what kind of access we can have to it, what are the levels of access. And we also ignore the bureaucratic pattern that has been established. Therefore, when the Occupy movement happened in New York, and I would think about like two examples that happened that we brought in this conversation. One was the Occupy movement in New York, and the residue of that, which being one active group. There are a couple of active groups, but one being decolonize this place, and what do they do these days is we can see that the pattern that was established by Occupy Wall Street was very welcome by the city, by the authorities, by the capitalist system. That was a good display to show that this is a failure, because this is a complete reactionary movement to something that we have established, and even the aesthetic of it is extremely chaotic. So the public was sort of convinced that, well, yeah, like this is not what we want, as opposed to us thinking about how about let's talk about taking charge and creating our own policies and demanding our own authorities as public, which for artists it has been a difficult pattern because it requires for you to connect to your public. And that has been a problem always, all the time, because the artists there's this gap, and the gap comes from the institutions. The institutions promote these reactionary works, yet they don't really want to do a radical work, thinking about the roots, which goes back to the system and our system. And we also talked about the online presence that we have. And the same, the bureaucratic pattern that has been established on online, the surveillance system, that has been extremely out of control. And we're not even addressing that. I'm sure that we all know people are working on it. People are working on regulations. People are working on how we need to be conscious about like AI devouring our data and like creating products and commodifying it. I don't know. I personally also don't consider that as like a public space, but it is something that relates to public domain and requires our own authority to demand what we want. And I think this time, right now, with all the protests and with the situation with COVID and all of that, at least what I'm saying is mainly based on New York and what I feel and what I sense, which is even not complete. But I think there should be a new path for I also don't want to use this idea of reclaiming because I think we have to be more proactive in that sense, and demanding new spaces for ourselves with a complete vision of what it means to have a space for public in a neighborhood, which hasn't been designed. This city is not designed to serve the public. Never. That was never an idea. Still, it's not an idea. But how can we change that? We have to have a plan. And with reactionary work, it's kind of impossible to get to that idea and vision.
Thank you, Mohammed. So Carlos has a question for Krisztián, like related to presentation, right? Would you want to share that now?
Yeah, but I can just say, because I think the conversation we're having is important and I don't want to take away from this topic, I guess I'll just say that for me, I think, before asking my questions, that I think these different concepts of public space, a more traditional one where we think of bodies assembling and then an idea of a networked public, I think they're obviously different modes of power and control, and I think they also overlap, and I think that's why it's hard to talk about them, because we do see the privatization of one and then this network control opening up into these other forms, these different mutating forms, but I think there are also instances like these big protests where there are exemplifications that these different systems of power and spatial systems of power operate kind of at the same time or in parallel. But I just wanted to ask two kind of quick things about your presentation, Krisztián, which I thought was fascinating, and
thanks.
We should talk about these things sometimes. But and I'll try to make them relevant to like a broader conversation because I don't want to just ask really specific questions. But the first one was, I was just kind of quick question with this artist you presented, Farideh Fayrouz. I mean, what is going on with this fictional character? What's going on with this racialization that's happening, and how he's advocating for public space by way of a performative racialization? And then secondly, just with these collectives that or a collective and then a kind of public demonstration, collective institution, like institution building process, how do you historicize them you looked at a subset of collective practices that are emerging in the 2000s. How do you historicize them against or in relation to social forms of collaboration under state socialism and the sociality of state socialism, and how are they responding to that? Because I think this is also a myth of an artist, like that these things collective practices weren't allowed, so there's a kind of mythologization of an individual artist in their studio, like, I don't know, people like Ivan Grigorescu and this kind of figure. So anyways.
So thanks for the questions, Carlos. I'm glad you asked about Farid because I wanted to talk more about his work. It just kind of didn't necessarily find a place, but basically Michal took on Farid's character, who was basically
a Lebanese fictional character that he took up for a performance first, which was a part of an act against Eastern European self-orientalization. And basically, he kind of announced his own arrival as an artist would arrive to the dance center, who would like to get to know more about the dance scene in Romania and would like to do collaborations. And it's kind of really interesting because the whole character of Farid started out from this kind of, first of all, undermining this connectivity, this kind of network culture that exists in the arts, as far as I'm concerned. And the second part that I understand, and I still didn't have enough conversations with Farid to understand it completely, is that it's also emerged, and this is a very important point, from the whole struggle that happened around the dance center. Because eventually the character did have this racial element, but eventually it kind of lost it. So if you see a Farid Fariu's performance, the elements kind of disappeared in a lot of times and not always present. I mean, like the ones I saw, they were not necessarily present. And there is actually a series of pictures I wanted to show you, but it's too many pictures where there's a drawing on the wall with this character. And it's exactly the question, where are you going to dance now in the discoteca? And everybody's taking a picture about it. So actually the character, which was this racialized character that was only used to counteract the orientalization and kind of undermine the network culture within the if I understood right, but maybe there are even more aspects to it, kind of transformed to the collective identity of the place, and also him to lose the public position he had with his previous name, which was the director of this institution. And to, if I answered to that question.
Yeah.
And the second part, from the social forms of collectives in socialism, is quite interesting because part of the text, and actually both, so part of the Harta text and part of, I think, the public action or the actions of CNDB and actually the artists are against kind of this heroic culture within history and the way Romanian history is written and the way art history is written. And it's kind of, if you look at the Harta text, let me just get it out myself. I think the first one, how do we attain knowledge, is exactly talks about that, how these discussions revolved around, on one hand, I'm quoting here, it's on the third page, the discussions revolve around, on one hand, need for a more contemporary approach in education, on the other hand, the nationalist indignation of our history and our heroes, and a broad discussion about tradition, patriotism, and national pride. And in the history of collectives in Romania, I don't think CNDB is connected to any of the collectives that I'm aware of, because that's a really important element too, that Romanian art history as a single unit was, again, self-orientalistically written in the 2000s by leading intellectuals who kind of forced this idea of, we had these groups and then we had these individuals, like, for example, Sigma, or for example Subreal, and or all that, and they were doing these actions. There is Ileana Pintela's book on actionism, which were these kind of submersive acts against the system, which are just not true about the situation. So I really recommend to follow the writings of Alina Sherban, the Institute of Present, because she's been doing a lot, I think, in an even higher level to kind of mix up this monotheistic view of Romanian art history and methodologies from Clara Kemp-Welch and, as you probably know, and what was the other book that was really good on this? I will think and send you more. But I think also, and one more thing to add with the Occupy, with the National Dance Center, is that they are on a really different trajectory than performance art practices in Romania, as I understand. I mean, like in an interview with Farideh, he literally said, I didn't hear about all the actions happening in Timișoara, all the actions happening in Transylvania. They were not relevant to me. So their kind of collectivization is, as I understand, is really different. But if anybody has further understanding of it, I'm really open for comments.
Thank you both. Rami, you wanted to add something.
Yes, hi everyone, and thank you for the great works and presentations. I wanted to add more to the discussion of public space. And when we talk about public spaces, I was thinking, who governs these public spaces, and to what extent can we call them public if the public does not govern them? Throughout time and time again, whether it was the state or now as we see the state and the private entities together, find ways to stop any movement that is deemed unfit for the public by their standards, by the state standards or by private entities standards, and then the public space no longer is public. So as long as we conform to the norms of the state or the private entities or the system that is governed, this space is public for people who aren't fomenting dissent, more or less. And it's more or less it's a type of governance that is found all over the world. It's kind of a worldly system, so it doesn't just reside in capitalism. Even pre-capitalism, these things were found in it. I think mainly it resides in the forms of power and how they're expressed onto the masses by the governing elites. So in what I was thinking about is how can we consider a space public at all in any context if we can be kicked out of it at any instant. Same with what happened with Zuccotti Park, with Occupy Wall Street. For example, in Lebanon, most of our public streets and roads are basically closed off so that politicians can provide security to themselves because they fear for their lives. So we have no access to these roads, even though they are public streets and public roads. Same with the parks in New York City. If we go to the extent of like, oh, you can't go into the park after 7 p.m., you can't do several things that are based, that are rules and regulations put by the state that have nothing to do with the public, more or less. Thank you.
Elsa?
Yeah, I think Rami is completely on point. And to add to that, for instance, if you think about the instance where the Lebanese civil war is always remembered is there's a bus that it started with, right? This bus, it was kept after the civil war as a memorial in a public space. But the way it was used was that the government kind of neutralized it, even though it was so politicized, and it became a piece of art where artists would just jot down pieces of poetry on it and just like paint it up and do so much work for healing post-civil war, which took 15 years in the case of Lebanon. The government kind of held it and neutralized it. So like, that's why I always think about the tensions between those three, the trilogy of authority that the public has, the government has, and then private entities have in neutralizing or politicizing a certain object or a certain space that could turn from private to public in an instance. Which is why I thought it was very interesting what the Chicanos did in Farideh's case, and thank you for the presentation. I thought it was really interesting and how it ties back to the context that we come from. So yeah, and even right now with the graffiti around the walls in Lebanon, even though we do not have real public space, as Rami was sharing, people kind of took ownership of the space that's already around. Does that make it public or not? Or does that make the tension smaller from the public, that they actually took up some space from that public, quote unquote, space that the government has provided around them? So yeah, these are the thoughts I wanted to share more concerning Lebanon and objects and spaces around us.
So thank you, Elsa. So Sonia, you've been leaving some comments also related to commons and like land ownership. Do you want to share, or do you want to keep it in writing?
I mean, yeah, I don't want to like repeat myself. I could just kind of wrote it there, but I just, this, you know, I make a lot of links between what we're able to build collectively, kind of how we're able to create, you know, social commentary, artworks, institutionalized outside of kind of the dominant institutions. Like all of that to me ties to this idea, like what allows us to have autonomy. And like, you know, like at a very basic level, you know, if you're strapped into being dependent, if there's no way to be independent for your reproduction, meaning like just basis of like where you get your food, shelter, money, like to kind of like survive, like if there's no, like if everything is, if the path is so thin, like that every, you know, there's nowhere to step to the side, like you're bound to depend on these, like you have to answer with your ideas to these greater institutions that are dominant because they own everything around you. So it's like, and again, like to me, finding a way out of that really relates to considering public space, not just in terms of like the place of congregation, but the place of also like returning back to this idea, which is now in such distant past that we don't even, when we talk about public space, we don't even talk about the fact that like there's no place to like to plant a plant in public. Like in the past, and I've done some research for this, like, you know, in my thesis work, in my MFA, just like on the history of like the idea of the commons, and like, you know, in the past, like even like when kings own land, like, you know, that in England in particular, they have documentation that I was able to sort of access other countries, whatever, harder to get to those historical documents, but at least like in England, like even when a king owned land, like people passing through had, like there's a list of things that could be done there. Your cattle could graze, you could dig for minerals, you could plant your food, you could sleep there. So it was a different kind of ownership. And so we live in this world in which things are owned to such a severe level that like all these rights that used to exist, even when somebody owned land, like people had different kinds of, you know, access. So I think we're kind of like, I'm always forcing myself to, when thinking about public space, to think back about just like also what has been just lost and how to regain that or create something new where individuals and society and collectives and groups can just have more access to be autonomous within these spaces, like limit the severity of this expulsion from existing in any way other than just neatly walking down a sidewalk, and you know, like we can't really do anything else in public. So I know this is kind of, yeah, a lot, not directly related, but related. I always make this link personally.
So, Sonia, you make a really strong point there, and like a really meaningful point there. But I wonder, like, if there's a little bit of harm in nostalgizing, like I know you're not doing this, but like, idea of loss is also like a little bit of like nostalgizing of like a monarchic past.
No. Do not misunderstand me. I have absolutely no nostalgia
Yeah.
for times of monarchies. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, I'm making a comparison that where we are right now, in some ways, is even worse than like, you know, like I'm not saying it's worse than like when people's heads were just being chopped off randomly by monarchs, but I mean like in this one instance, like this one example, like I think our conditions right now are very severe, and I think sometimes we have very, because we have access to certain liberties which are really important in the, you know, in expressing, like there have been a lot of victories and like the world has moved forward in a lot of ways, but there's also been this like hidden worsening restriction that is really pacified by the liberties that individuals have been able to gain and in other ways. but there is this very severe process that's been going on in terms of privatization of everything. So that's my only point. I'm not saying that that I have zero nostalgia for.
Yeah, I think that's much sorry.
No, absolutely zero.
Well, you know, I think like coinciding with what you said, as I privately chatted with you, I think so much of this has to deal with the privatization of time as well. I mean, as this one like amazing guy, Stephen Crary, wrote, like 24/7, the late capitalism and the ends of sleep. The ways that like we ever like encroaching on every aspect of our life, every minute of our life. There's new technologies that are mining us, data mining us, taking our space and our time. And I wonder, like moving away from the nostalgia for, in my case, a nostalgia for sort of a pre-internet moment. But if there's ways to like conceive, practically speaking, of like, I don't know, just being on Tor browsers, you know, like the ways to actually hide ourselves from sort of large public or surveillance gazes, or the possibilities of monetization as one gets together to create our own sort of public spaces while it's difficult to do.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say one more thing, Rashmi, just picking up on your point about this, you know, mining of our internal space as well, how that's being privatized. And, you know, for me as a neuroscientist, and, you know, like, and I really have thought about that for, you know, for a while. Like, I just really feel that, you know, our ability, the way that we think and the cognitive capacities that we have to hold attention for long enough to digest complex ideas and really come up with new solutions or creatively think, it's highly limited by the amount of attention that's being sapped into these various social networks and other ways in which the internet is, you know, gaining information from our interactions with it for advertising and for monetizing it in various ways. So the sapping of our resource of attention is really, really sacrificing our ability to think through problems and to also remember and to really, you know, I think it's changing how we can function. So I think it's really important to think about that as well.
Thank you, Sonia and Rashmi. So Edith, would you like to comment on this, because you kind of like have slight counter comment?
Yeah, so I think also talking about this nostalgia, it's a bit tricky because, for example, here we have a lot of land that it's in between blocks, you know, apartment blocks, that it's used by the people for either growing flowers or vegetables and stuff like that. There is a huge culture of resistance to what public space means in terms of growth in through also seed bombs. And that's a practice that has been used not only in Romania and so forth, and it's something that also talks about reclaiming public space, but not in this way of human presence as such, but also through like what we grow in these public spaces, like what we grow as human interaction, that it's not institutionalized. And it's another example that I have that maybe it's in the opposite direction of this. It's what happens when the government, let's say, uses public space as growth in itself and then makes people work, you know, like public work. For example, in Uzbekistan, I hope I'm not saying something stupid and my memory doesn't fail me, but it's this culture in which there is a lot of landfill near the cities or villages where people are actually forced to work for the state. So they have jobs that are very limited, and the other frame of their job is working on these landfills. Like it's for cotton, most of the cotton that we use in Europe, for example. So I think it's a very contextual somehow understanding of what public space means. And it's also important to look maybe at these aspects that are somehow very different from what we understand as somehow universalist way of public space being taken over. because we see it as in a capitalist way, but it can also be forced. It can also be a space of resistance and natural growth, so to speak. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add, because I feel like we're putting so much weight on this aspect of the public space being taken away from us, and not having or like moving it, like internet, for example. It's also an interesting public space, also like regarded to the other comment of using Tor, because most of these representations are associated with the dark web, which is considered to be, illegal. So it's also interesting to see this as another form of resistance, seeing internet as another form of resistance from this point of view. So it's always this duality that we have to pay attention to, and also who uses that. So that would be what I would like to add.
Thank you. Krisztián?
I just wanted to, let me lower my hand. Wanted to add to Edith's comment about the use of land and kind of how like gardening is kind of a counter public space, and how like Bilyana was telling at the beginning not to forget about the rural, is that it's really interesting because, for example, in the history of Eastern European countries, we had a forced collectivization, which was actually a sort of control of public space, because there were lands that could have been used by farmers collectively, but not in the way that it would have been governed by the government, but they would be able to use this collective land, grow, and then take it to the market. And then, communism came, and there was in Hungary from 1948 up until 1954, well, to be fair, until the 60s, there was a forced collectivization to make everybody's private land and a collectively shared land, a collective land, which had been a state-owned land, which was extremely controlled. And actually, the government implemented a own measure to counteract its own controlled public space for giving people access to little gardens. It was called the second economy. It was basically, in Hungary, it was called, it was part of the kind of notion of, if you're not against us, you're with us. So they just wanted people to be depoliticized. They just wanted them to be in their garden, which was a private place, but it was kind of a counteract to the overly controlled public space. And eventually a lot of them became public space because they became part of social gatherings and all that. And those places are still possibilities for people to kind of be, well, not necessarily apolitical, but to kind of get out from state-led structures. I mean, like at that time, people could make their living. In Hungary, we didn't have hungers because people were not part of the collectivized public space. And I mean, like, there were a lot of other ways. And the other thing I wanted to say about Romania that I find really interesting in terms of public space is the problems of deforestation, because forests are in a way public space and national parks are public space, and they are being cut out now by individuals, which is the government not stopping. So I think if we think about like controlled public space and how public space is disappearing, we cannot not think about these elements of environmental surrounding that is either overly controlled or not taken care of by governments. And the other thing I wanted to add is that I think another interesting thing is that because a lot of us is from different places, is that I think each of our definition of the public space is very different. I mean, like, we have a different history of how community or collective were defined. I mean, like, just while I was talking, I had to correct myself like 5 times to explain a certain terminology. So I think it would be really interesting to kind of see. My question would be, which I wanted to ask from Elsa and Naim, is Rami, sorry, but he's not here anymore, is that I saw that in Lebanon, during the recent protest, one of the most used place was a parking lot where people were organizing self-teaching exercises. And actually comedians were a really big part of this organization. I mean, like, I mostly pick up things from Western media, my bad, I'm sorry. But I would really like to hear about this, how comedians help
learning, and how comedians can help us to deregulate the public space that is controlled by the government in a way through protest.
Yeah, actually, there was one old opera house that was stopped being built in the 70s, I want to say, right when the civil war started in Lebanon, and it just stopped being built, right? And from then on, it was completely closed. When the revolution actually happened, folks came back to it, opened it up, went in, filled it with graffiti, started talking, and comedians started coming in, politicians, like new alternative politicians started coming in, feminist folks started coming in, LGBTQ folks started coming in and talking, making it a space for them, aside from the parking lot, because the parking lot is actually parallel to it. So if there was something going on in there, they would go to the parking lot. And the parking lot actually had the big fist that said revolution on it. So it was really a meeting point for folks to come in and talk. And there was also a parallel old opera house that was supposedly going to be an opera house that was also being functioning as a space for revolutionary information and knowledge exchange. So yeah, and comedians obviously started using their platforms even more to make fun, but now they're getting summoned to court because of everything that they did. So it's always a negotiation of the space around you, right? It's always a negotiation of opening up a closed space that was completely ignored, or taking over a parking space that was empty, and then whatever you say, that public space that you take up, he might be held against you in the future. So it's like, it's a constant negotiation, if that makes sense. I hope I answered your question, Krisztián.
No, definitely. Thanks. Thanks very much.
Rad, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, first of all, I'm so sorry. I feel so dumb. I was looking forward to this conversation and I thought it was at 4.
Good to have you here.
So, and it's so strange that I reached the conversation when you're talking about Lebanon.
Yeah.
Being Lebanese, but in exile, living in San Francisco. But I had the chance to be in Lebanon during part of the revolution, and specifically in my hometown in Tripoli, and there was something really amazing happening with public space. I mean, this is a city that where there's a lot of wealth gap, like the rest of the country, but where people from different classes don't have the chance to meet. I mean, and then all of a sudden, the public space became like this space of encounter between people who were university professors and others who never went to school, and there were some very active community organizers who would every night create a topic of debate where everybody could participate, and the topics ranged from everything, like from what does it mean to civil participation and politics, and I thought that was it was such a beautiful moment. I mean, unfortunately, then with the lockdowns, the government found a reason to shut down those spaces, but I hope that we will see them reemerge.
I have a question for, I guess for everyone, like in terms of talking about kind of like plurality of what public space constitutes, and especially with the definition of what civil space is, and understanding that we all function within a civil space where there's like directional architecture varies from one context to another, and it's just a matter of kind of awareness, like to what extent we are actually directed in our kind of everyday interaction with the environment that we are in, and then forcefully controlled or like willingly controlled. And that in that sense, thinking about also the online space as a branch of public. I guess my question, like going back to also like Farideh's examples with ASCO and kind of like what are now practically like historic but revisited and kind of like we are perpetually seeing and kind of embodying reenactments of these claims for visibility, for public space, for creating space for what is not visible. And what we are seeing with, especially now during the uprising, and what we were experiencing in terms of the governing control that has been functioning for a while in such way that there is this like contrast between necessity to have visible bodies and necessity to have invisible infrastructure that actually facilitates these processes. So I guess my question is, what to like when it comes to acceleration and when it comes to the aspects of gathering in public and acting within public and actually embracing the hybridity of our roles within it as artists or from whatever realm we are coming from, to what extent our infrastructures need to be visible in order to be embraced as parallel systems, and like what Mohammed was talking about, and just like the conversations we had in terms of kind of like abolishing capitalism. Like, is that even the infrastructure that is being entertained while we are talking about like neoliberal agendas, co-opting like either public space or humor. When Elsa was talking about a comedian in Lebanon, I was immediately thinking of an actual presidential candidate in Serbia, like several years ago, who was like a fictional character, like on a white horse, being like a parody to what the government is. And he actually gained 10% of the popular vote, but ended up actually being like a Trojan horse for the current autocratic government. So practically those like 10% were just like co-opted to enhance autocratic regime. So we are seeing that kind of like acceleration of co-opting of so many different ways of resisting, that to what extent we can afford to be visible anymore. It's a long question, but hope it makes sense.
So I have a bit of something to say about this. I think we think too much in this kind of sort of also language and a specific practice that we should use. When I think the most important part is the encounter in itself, because an encounter as such, it's not predictable, and it also doesn't have a specific pattern. So I think in this way, it's very difficult to like take over an encounter, because that's also something that is very physical, and it's something that it's there and you cannot name it. You know it is real, but you don't have like a specific format or a specific practice to define it. So I think that that would be like one of the things that I also feel it's present in a movement, like a group of people moving with a specific idea in mind. So that's what I would have about. I mean, like I was thinking about this when you ask about these forms of being taken over and co-opted. That having an encounter, it's something that is very difficult to take over, because that's very specific, and it's also very, it's based on an exchange of energies and like-mindedness that can't be predicted. So that's me.
Eva, do you want to say something?
Yes, so a couple of things. First, Edith, I'm not sure if I understand what exactly you mean by encounter. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I have the feeling that more and more the collective intelligence is being used to predict and script encounters, which leads to the co-option which Natasha was talking about. Like when patterns are studied and people are surveyed and studied, and their movements and their behaviors are so well predicted now, these patterns can be created and planted artificially into many groups and to many seemingly spontaneous encounters or movements. So we do have to be extra careful now and extra analytical, but also allow for surprise directions. Because when Natasha asked first, should infrastructure be visible or invisible, my first reaction was it should be visible, because when it's invisible, it erases the intention of the structure. But upon thinking further down, making visible the structure also of resistance also make it much more vulnerable and more possible to analyze by others and by the big corporations and the governments, etc., etc., etc. So it is a complicated question, and would be very interesting to hear more about it.
Thanks, Eva. Mandana.
I think it's like, thank you, Eva. I think that was something that I've been thinking about when talking about internet and being kind of like, this is now a public space. And also going back to Hitostar, which I kind of like, I know this is boring now, but she has this video of, it's a kind of like a didactics to how to be invisible, right? Because when you are visible, like, you're very vulnerable and you can be tracked, you can be kind of like, you know, just erased, as we've been witnessing that, right? So like with the physical space, that the matter is to be visible, but with like internet, like the matter is how to not be visible. So it's kind of like, exactly, it's not flat. We can't be like, oh, this is not like the public space I want to be in. Of course, like we want that, like, you know, that ideal public space, but we are living in this moment, that, and this is the reality we're living in, or like this is the, I don't know, virtual reality that we're living in. I don't know. It seems like a huge kind of a problem for me right now. Like, where am I, or like, how do I think about like public space? How can I navigate this? Just that.
Thanks, Rami. Thanks, Mandana.
So if I understood the question properly, so the way I would think about it is we have to evaluate our value system and see if we were to collectivize, in a sense, where we create an alternative platform that evaluates the art that we would create, and then creates a different kind of going back to value system by which we would be able to be autonomous from utilizing all those organizations or systems that we do not fully agree with, that co-opt us into not agreeing, but being part of a system that doesn't fall in line with what we believe in. And to the extent that if we organize and decide on a value system, we could create an alternative that would rival the current system. But then again, going back to the notion of being visible or invisible, that would render us vulnerable if we so as pose a threat to the current systems that are enforced. So it's a very tricky matter in a way where we would achieve what we want without facing opposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Krisztián.
I have been spending the last few weeks, because in Hungary now you can meet with people, with meeting with a few people in the civic space here. I didn't spend a lot of time with this when I lived here, and they told me a really interesting example. So Hungary has a quite right-wing government with anti-civil and anti-liberal leaders, as they call themselves. And they were telling me that example of that there is one civic kind of group in one of the city called Pécs, which managed to organize itself that it's able to give out grants. And as soon as they were able to do that, and they did the first round of grants, the government started to send a smear campaign on them through the media. The government owns the whole media here, basically, calling them, well, they really like to use the name of George Soros, that they are the merchants of George Soros. And, you know, they made themselves visible, but as soon as they started to further organize themselves, the government tried to turn the public opinion against them. So this is one of the things I wanted to say about how to be visible in a place which is, well, doesn't allow you to be visible. The other thing I was thinking about in terms of Farideh's presentation, and we talked about this a little bit, but I also came to my mind that you said that the Chicano murals were really representative of the neighborhood, and they used these murals to be visible. So they kind of used a kind of oriental device on themselves, so they would be able to redefine that device. And I always think, and I was thinking about that, actually that allowed themselves to be, and you actually said to me when we first talked that it's really interesting for you how they, or maybe I read it in the text, I mixed it up. It's really interesting how they kind of, in every single, even in the no film, they use these oriental devices to become visible, but they also communicate a message. I mean, like also an advertising post is also a certain device, not necessarily an oriental, but they made themselves visible through like this kind of double abstraction. So I would wonder, is that first of all, what you think of it? And also like, is that a way to make yourself visible? Because that's what basically the Serbian autocratic government did. They used an oriental device to sneak 10% extra. I mean, like that's what the alt-right's doing. They're kind of using these devices of visibility, which they hide behind, and then they just, I'm the Trojan horse. So is that kind of Trojan horsing is a way of making yourself visible, and is it still useful as it was for the group in the 80s? Or is it only useful for alt-right, or is it possible to use by, you know, leftist organizations? So that's kind of a question for everyone, but first of all, yeah.
Well, I think if that's something that you identify with like that identifies you and your community, why not? You can use that. You know, I guess like the fight at some point is about establishing ourselves as who we are and who we represent, and in establishment of that identity, oriental means can come in. And after establishing that, maybe we can talk about a more, you know, general way of representation, if I make sense. So if it's still possible, I'm often thinking about that, you know, and I thought about that mainly when City had this open call for murals. And I was thinking about, you know, I would love to have a mural that represents my concern, and, you know, thinking about somebody who immigrated from Middle East, whose region has been subject of war for the past 60 years. And there's a large population of refugees who flee from these countries, and they're living here. Do I have the representation of my voice in this city? Do I see that representation in the murals? And if I want to create a mural, to what extent can I bring in those elements into that representation? But then when I'm talking about systematic censorship is when I'm reading the guidelines, I realize that I can't, because as soon as I start putting those elements into my proposal, I'm being censored and I'm not being accepted to have that representation. That's why, you know, for me, looking at ASCO and looking at the other collective from San Diego, all I'm thinking about how to interrupt that and how to live out of that system. So I don't need to have their permission to have that representation of my history in a place that many of us exist and occupy. And that leads me to what happened, you know, that leads me, it's, I don't know, I guess like, maybe I'm rambling around, but that leads me to, you know, what I'm seeing in Occupy Wall Street, that, and what I'm seeing in terms of like the rules and policies and regulations that exist within the city, that fundamentally I'm being silenced if I want to do anything out of the system. So yeah, I don't know, like that's why I don't know if something that ASCO did is still possible. I don't know if something that the collective in San Diego did is still possible. And I'm looking for the answer. That's why, you know, I was curious to see how everybody think about public space and intervening public space and interrupting public space, or what are the ways that everybody thought about that. You know, I'm looking at the current situation, and curfew happened and people claim the public space by going to the street after 8 p.m. That's a way of interrupting the norm. When it comes to the role of the artists, how can we do that? Do we have that agency? Are we given that agency? Are we given that imagination that we can do that? Yeah.
Luciana, thank you, Farideh.
So, Farideh, we had this conversation on sarcasm and how it's such a strong tool politically and artistically for information to flow without being frontal and many times without being protected from. So in Brazil, because of dictatorship, for years and years, we had this component in our culture to have some message spreaded in all areas of culture. And that was a way that, going back to what Natasha said, we didn't have this structure visible enough so it could be dismantled. So, but it's almost like everyone had the key to read it, and it was all over. And it passed by easily from, you know, the dictatorship couldn't see it. And it was right in front of them all the time for years and years and years. We had this conversation, Farideh and I, with other artists on how sarcasm is hard to be spotted. And I think, Natasha, and I agree with Rami, if it's very seen, the structure, you can't resist. If it's all there, you know, censorship will come and just make it unavailable.
Thanks. I just want to make a quick comment on like Farideh's questions in terms of artists having agency or not, and like what is the kind of continuum of kind of existing in public space and claiming it. I mean, first of all, like what I found really worrying in a way throughout these protests is just like normalization of participation in like nonprofit industrial complex. So you parallelly have the conversation that is institutional critique and the kind of like racial capitalism within the institutions of arts and culture, and then parallelly the boosting of, you know, support towards nonprofit that functions in a very similar way, but with a different like range of kind of focuses. So even the action to defund police, once the police is you know, defunded and ideally abolished, those funds will still be distributed through the institutional channels versus directly to the communities that actually can create alternative and sensible ecosystems to kind of like fortify the health and the well-being of the community itself. And in that sense, I think that artists actually play a huge role, especially when it comes to like this, as it exists right now, segregated field of art, to where artists tend to subjugate themselves to the acceptance and the green light of what the institution is, where the art itself has to be like really like liberated from that framework, and to actually, for like going back what Rami said, in terms of like what is the value system. So I think it's an individual question, it's a collective question of like what one's values are, and as artists, I think that has to be a priority, because we are the weapon. Like we are the first ones to get like instrumentalized, weaponized, in terms of like the production of visual culture. And also like the nation state has been built thanks to artistic production, in the sense of like perpetuated as such. So like I think that it's a matter of like self-education, like a continuous conversation, so we can all kind of understand like what are these like repressive kind of like structures that we place ourselves in, that are placed upon us, in order to actually be full, to kind of embody full potential of what our multiple kind of roles are within functional society that we want to be a part of, and not as artists, not as this and that and whatever kind of like professional label one can carry around, but as thinkers and active agents within that ecosystem. That's just my comment. Jelena.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know if this will give any answer to Natasha, your question about visibility, invisibility. And I think it's a good continuation on your mentioning of ecosystem. I can say, like from personal experience, that and seeing this, how HEKLER started and what it is now, seeing all these people from different spaces and places in conversation. It started like through opening door of my private home in Brooklyn. So where people could come and gather and have conversations, and where they felt like that they are hosted properly. Like some friends will, compare that with Slava in Serbia that we celebrate here, which is a holiday where people gather, eat, share stories from life, politics, whatever. So it came this private space. Our house became kind of public space, because it would happen sometimes that I would encounter people outside of the house. They will say that they were at our house and had great meaningful conversations, and I maybe would not remember them being in the house, because you cannot catch up with everybody. So that hybrid worked for people to get together, collaborate, create meaningful conversations and projects. And now with this virtual space, which is a third kind of space, so it's not public, it's not private, it's something else, you have more international conversations. So in one moment you can have people discussing on the same subject matter, but having completely different backgrounds and completely different experiences in this very present moment, and we all can reflect on different things. So talking about role of artists, that is kind of an agency that's outside of art, that is outside like art institution, that it's outside of like some funding that comes from the institutions, especially because our private space was not funded that way. And I don't know, it's just like, I find that hybrid being invisible and being visible, just like strategize how to approach both ways and use it in order to, maintain discussions and just like generate new ideas. And it goes why ecosystem. I've been reading an interesting book on like how trees communicate. And there is like, I didn't know, discovered that they communicate thanks to fungi that are underground, like underworld network, which like gives them information on insects, on possible animals that will attack and destroy leaves, so they can like spread the information throughout other leaves and then protect them from like 100 yards, even protect the forest from some kind of like what would be maybe censorship here. So if all of us are like acting locally within our own small, you know, surroundings, but are still connected internationally, we are all always aware of what's happening within these smaller communities, so we kind of interact and work together. So I don't know, just hybrid of all these things seems like something that it's, to me, really interesting and amazing that it's happening, like just through this conversation. I'm really blown away seeing, you know, how in our house, how it started, and like seeing all these people here that are super, you know, interesting and have so many things to share and are actually engaged and want seriously to think what the change should be. So I don't know, just a thought. Thank you, everybody, for everything that you are sharing and for participating. That's all.
Thank you guys for making it happen.
Thanks, Jelena. So do you, Farideh and Krisztián, do you want to have a like a closing? And yeah, after you, before that, because we were gonna kind of wrap up slowly, I would like to ask Rad. So Rad and Carlos, who was with us, but he had to leave, will host the next gathering that will happen on 26th of June. So that's next Friday during Pride weekend. And Rad, would you like to say, you know, a few words about the assembly that you will be hosting?
Yeah, thank you, Natasha. Again, I feel just having heard a little bit from the conversation on public space, I feel this will be kind of a continuation to this conversation, since Pride is conceived as an action in public space that brings people together and is about visibility. And I feel that, yeah, this current moment heightened our thinking about what is Pride in the current moment. I mean, for me as someone who's Lebanese but living in the US, living in San Francisco, so we have a number of, sorry, I haven't had the chance to really think how I'm going to introduce this since I'm being put on the spot, but we have a number of readings to, so we're departing from the invitation of Munoz, which is now a little bit old, to think about queerness as an ideality, as a utopian thinking about the world. And I want to re-ask that question today. Is queerness still that? Can queerness still be that? And there's so many things that come to mind. So maybe I'll leave with one thing. I was very happy to see some Lebanese people here. But one of the things that was very striking about and the intersectionality between saying that, you know, our fight against corrupt governments is also a fight against the whole way of thinking, the whole patriarchal way of thinking. So I feel that there is, even though the Middle East region is labeled as homophobic, even though with the passing away of Sarah Hijazi, I don't know if some of you have heard of her, who put an end of her life, there were so many voices that were homophobic coming out of this. I feel that there is an impetus to think of queerness as a changing force for the Middle East. And I wanted to also talk about that. Sorry, it's all over the place, it's so disordered, but these are some of the things that I was thinking about.
Sorry for calling you out like that. Thank you.
Well, since we are wrapping up, thank you all for being here. This was amazing. And it was really great to hear everybody's thoughts. And since Krisztián asked me again to mention this part, you know, sometimes I personally freak out because I think that I guess we are living in a situation that imagination is taken away from us, imagining the better future, imagining the alternative, and imagining how things could be possibly be. And honestly, that was one of the reasons that I thought about public space, because I feel like, as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think that what we are experiencing right now is at least here in New York, and maybe I can say in general in the United States, is not the true definition of the public space as the promised public space. And for me, kind of looking back at these artists and opening up the conversation and willing to share that with everybody was, you know, kind of like giving the opportunity to imagine what could possibly be and how we can contribute to that imagination. And I'm really happy to hear everybody's thoughts and how everybody is so resistant towards the norm that we're experiencing right now. Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks for everyone for coming and bearing with us and sharing your thoughts and just getting together. I mean, like for me in the last 3 months, these meetings in general were really useful and purposeful because I was in my hometown, which is not really my general space. So that's just on the side. And on imagination, I think what is really important, and I think in the projects that I looked at, both of them are kind of forced, is that they were spaces that allowed people, and the same way this space allows us, and the way Bilyana, you were talking about HEKLER in New York, where I haven't been yet, but I hope it soon will come, is that it allows people for imagination. And I think that's what Farideh said about imagination, and we talked about this before, super important, that what I find really interesting in these moments, that people are allowed to believe in utopias again, in a way. I mean, like, not necessarily the same utopias as, and I have no nostalgia for those utopias, and Zrad was saying as well, asking the question, can queerness be a utopia? I think this is really a moment when we all, who are privileged enough to be in their house, had time to think about our future. And I think both of these projects for me were really inspiring because they forced people to think, imagine, and act at the same time. And I think now we had a lot of thinking, and I really hope that this amount of thinking, when things will allow us to gather again and have chance encounters and all that, we will be able to do actions. So yeah, that's probably my wrap-up note.
Yeah, so also we have, so Isidora also is sharing some of her comments. There's a whole another discussion. But like, Isidora, do you want to say something about it, or
it was just a thought? Yeah, because I have to leave now, so I just wanted to squeeze in something that I thought about, because I don't know, I just think it's interesting topic to research.
Okay. So we will add the questions that are shared within the chat on the Google Doc, the shared Google document. So, you know, whoever feels, you know, as like responding to them or like reflecting on the conversation, you're welcome. And this is an open document, like anyone with the link can have access to it. Yeah, and maybe also to share what the public, like Rad, like because you were late. This is another like calling you out again. So what public? We had a icebreaker question at the beginning. So Krisztián and Farideh were asking, if you were an element in public space, what would you be? And Isidora too, because Isidora, you were
like a physical element.
Whatever, it can be whatever.
Whatever the element. Wow, that's a very deep question.
We went from like trash can to a cloud, so everything is covered.
Yeah, I think
Sorry, nothing left for you.
Huh?
Nothing left for you. Everything's been taken.
Everything. What about the lamp and the lamppost? The lamp that is looking from above.
Yeah, that's good.
I think I said I would like to be a crosswalk.
Oh, you said a crosswalk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you all.
Thanks for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. It was lovely. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.